Over time, words change their meaning in a semantic dance with the objects and ideas to which they refer, as these too undergo transformation. The phenomenon is one of evolution, as it occurs within the ecology of culture. Example, album. In the 16th century, students in Middle Europe started collecting each other's autographs in their Bibles. And then publishers started adding a few extra pages in the Bibles to accommodate this writing. And eventually they began to put together books which were entirely blank pages. And then the students started writing not just their autographs, but perhaps a few words of poetry and a small illustration. These books were called album amicorum. Album being Latin, meaning white thing, and amicorum, friendship. Now, if you go back to ancient Rome, the album was a white slate, painted white prior to having anything written on it. And this is the metaphor that was extended to these books, the album amicorum. The Shinnstitute does not have any 16th century documents, but we do have this. It's the autograph book that was given to me by my grandmother many years ago. Here's the title page that she drew when she was 12, and the first entry in it is by her younger sister Phyllis. So already, although I was expecting to have autographs of, I don't know, Noel Coward or Charlie Chaplin, it's not that at all. It is in fact a very traditional form of friendship book. Here's a piece by, two pieces in fact, a piece of verse and a painting by Fred Britton. The verse is, well, a lot of this stuff is kind of banal, but it's very representative of its era. And the handwriting, the quality of the handwriting is quite astonishing when one compares it to later years. Here's some lovely little pictures that that Marjorie's friends have, there we are, high fashion in the 1920s or 1919. Look at that, it's something from the Mikado. And here's the tour de force. Look at that handwriting, isn't that amazing? The poem is what you might call constraints-based verse. It's a lisp in numbers, written in 1891 by a fellow called Synicus, in which the letter S is repeated again and again and again, but by someone with a lisp. Here's the final thing in the book, finish. But that's not the end of it, because there's something in here that I really wanted to show you. Here it is. This is a piece by my great-great-uncle, Sidney Shinn. He was a commercial artist, and for his contribution to his niece's book, he's done a version in watercolour of the famous painting Bubbles by John Everett Millais. The reason this was so famous was because it was used in promotion by the Pears Soap Company. It was in fact a very serious work addressing the fragility of infant life, because at the time there was a lot of infant mortality, far more than today. I think that what my uncle was great-great-great-uncle was trying to do was to impress upon his niece that he was in fact a real proper artist, and he could do his version of a very well-known piece. The next evolution in the concept of the album occurred around about 1860, when it was applied to photograph albums. This is actually from probably 100 years later, but it's entirely homemade with one-off lettering on there. And you can see that the the pages, instead of being white, they're a mid-grey to offset better the photographs that people would begin to stick in them. Because photography was starting to become very popular in the mid-19th century, and although the first really widespread photographs were tintypes that needed to be framed and protected by glass, as soon as prints that were made on paper and very small arrived on the scene, they could be collected in this kind of album rather than stored in a folio or framed and put on the wall. At the time, Victorian times, there were also scrap albums in which people collected ephemera. This is my scrap album from when I was a wee lad, and cutting up the Sunday supplements to the newspaper to make my own collages, again in the Victorian tradition. The photograph album evolved to become a much more elaborate beast. Here's one from the 1890s, a veritable tome. And you can see that rather than blank pages, the enterprising publisher has put some frames in and slots to put the standard size photographs into. Here's another page. Let's take a look at one of these. Pull this out. See on the back the photographer's information. A market emerged for printed ephemera, catering to collectors. So rather than collecting their own amateur photographs or whatever, pre-printed material was provided for collecting in albums, and postcards would be a perfect example. Here we see a collection of postcards from the 20th century, from New York. These are highly doctored photographs. They're originally taken in black and white, and then the clouds and the rest of the color in the sky is added by airbrushing. And there's other business going on, like if you count the number of floors on this particular tower and compare it to some of the other photographs, you can see that there's been a certain amount of cheating going on in order to get this tower to fit into the frame. A new idea emerged, not just the mass-printed material to go in the albums, but preparing the albums to accommodate that with printing on them. And this is a stamp album. This would date from probably around about 1920. With the invention of the Bonsack cigarette rolling machine, cigarette smoking became a mass addiction in the 1890s. You could buy cigarettes in anything from a large tin with 50 in to a package of 10, or at the bottom end, just 5. These are rather flimsy, so the manufacturers used to put a card in them, and then they had the idea of printing something on the card and making it a collectible series. Here's a metal container. Now, here is the cigarette album for collecting such cards in. Here's a lovely set that was published, illustrations of movie stars. Here's Maurice Chevalier. Now here's an idea. If a company is printing a series of cigarette cards, why not also print something pertaining to that specifically in an album? And here you have the complete concept, the big package. Life in the Royal Navy, a collection of cards, cigarette cards, with related graphics, and the text beneath where you stick them in is actually what was repeated on the back of the cards. The complete package, a series of 50, to encourage you to keep smoking in order to collect the entire set of premium cards. A slightly more substantial album from a Dutch company, importers of tea and coffee. Tic Tac is the name of the brand, and their album is Birds. It was printed in 1924, and the text here says that it's a very educational, useful public service they're providing, with all this information about birds and these beautiful, 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 beautiful illustrations. Aren't they lovely? If you were an illustrator, wouldn't you like the job of illustrating all these birds? Brooke Bond was a British tea company, also distributing in Canada. And here is their card book for dinosaurs. This dates from around 1960. Again, you've got not just the card and the text that was repeated from the back of the card, but also a lot of other useful educational information. Dinosaurs without feathers. Canadian. Here's a new twist. The cards that one collects are not actually with a product, they are the product. So here we have a complete package, Wonders of the Animal Kingdom. This dates from around 1960. And what one would do is acquire a series of the stickers in these nice little envelopes, purchasing them at a local store perhaps, and then putting them down in the book. Ah, more dinosaurs. Here's another one with the same idea. Motor cars of today and yesterday. This was also a colouring book. Early work by me, actually. Staying within the lines. And moving right along to the future. There they are, the Jetsons flying around in their fancy futuristic drone. Here's another one. This came with a comic that I subscribed to when I was, I don't know, 9 or 10. Marvels of the Modern Age. So I think these stickers probably came with the comic every week to encourage you to keep buying it. The ingenuity of printers and publishers was remarkable. They came up with all different kinds of ways of presenting and binding their printed material. This is a book of postcards. You can see that each image is printed on the back, ready to be sent in the mail, and they're perforated along the edge so that you can tear them out. But it didn't happen because these are actually quite nice little books in their own right, with none of the postcards removed. This would date from shortly before the First World War. Lovely old, look at that, eh? Lovely old, what kind of prints are they? They're gravure prints, very, very fine detail. Here's another one slightly later from the 1920s, same format. You've got the cover with the embossed or stamped lettering, and the gravure pictures, heavily doctored, of course. With I suspect that these were much larger prints that were retouched, adding the sky and making sure that all the details of the buildings were really, really sharp. Continuing in that vein, we have a photo album. This is from the Canadian Pacific Railroad Company. The part that's missing, I don't know what happened to that, but apparently it was just grey paper, so we won't worry too much about that. So it follows the format of a photo album, but comes with all the pictures. Again, the gravure photographs, and all the pictures are already in place. This is the kind of album that was produced to encourage people to take the railroad across Canada and stay at the Canadian Pacific hotels, Banff Springs with its swimming pool, and so on. Now we've seen the cigarette card album of movie stars. Here's the Screen Romances album of movie stars. This would date from probably around 1930. Look at these beautifully, remarkably airbrushed pictures with all kinds of special effects of airbrushing and Vaseline on lenses and what have you. There's Chevalier. It follows that, really serial format of everybody's picture is the same format and just a brief bit of text describing them. I like the way it's written, so each amount of text is written exactly so it can be squared off at the bottom of the page. It's a very rigorous and disciplined art form. Although I must admit, fitting people's heads into a square frame is not always the ideal proportion. New York by Night. This is a kind of collection of postcards, but instead of having them so that they can be torn out, they're in what's known as an accordion fold. So it's like getting a picture book of postcards, and you can bunch it up and send it in the mail with your stamp on. These pictures are quite remarkable because, of course, there are no colours at night except perhaps bright neon. These are in fact black and white photographs which have been retouched to simulate some kind of garish, unnatural colour. Look at this one, with the all the light beams and the moon and the clouds added to it. Statue of Liberty. New York's World's Fair. And with some text on the back. So it's kind of like a picture card collecting scenario, but it comes in a box that can then be mailed. See, there's a space for putting the address on the back. Here are a couple from Vienna. It's actually produced by the same company. Here are the photos, and they are indeed photos, photo printed, not printed from metal plates or anything like that. They've been bound in using a spiral binding. And here are the same many of the same photos from the same company in a mailable package. Well, maybe not mailable, you'd have to put it in an envelope. slightly larger photos, but many of them are exactly the same photos as in this little book. Some more little photo albums. If you got your pictures in the 1950s from Eaton's in Winnipeg, Eaton's would print them up for you and provide them to you in a little book that you could tear them out and put them in your photo albums, or just keep them in the book, as has happened here. Now, where's my wife? Is that her in the middle there? Yes, Kerry Shinn. And moving along to, I guess, the 1970s, the same idea, but instead of having the photos actually bound in, there are envelopes where the pictures can just be slotted into position. Nowadays, the dictionary definition of album starts off talking about a collection of musical numbers. But it wasn't always that way. If you go back to, this dates from around 1940, records were sold in these generic sleeves. The music you want when you want it. That's competition with radio, because with radio you have to listen to what they're playing at the time. So once you have a bunch of those, how do you store them? The answer is you put them in this kind of device. It's a record album. So the idea is very similar to those collecting cards or whatever, except it's applied to records. And when they go on the shelf like this, they stock really nicely without damaging them. For a longer piece of work, such as was typical with classical music, you'll find that a particular work was packaged as an album with two or more records in the package. So this is from around 1940. Taking that idea a step further, we enter the era of the great designer Alex Steinweiss. This is one of his early works from 1940. What the company is doing is taking a bunch of individual records by Duke Ellington and putting them into a package and marketing it as an album, a package. The Duke, with some text on the inside. Taking it a step further, rather than just a collection of the Duke's work, how about a collection of music which is themed? In this case, Risa Stevens is singing the songs of Cole Porter. Again, we recognize it as being a design by Steinweiss because it's got his special loopy lettering there. In the 1950s, the concept goes a step further. This is from, I think, 1956. Calendar Girl, Julie London. The concept is 12 songs, actually 13 songs, because you've got the 13th month. Here they are. And in fact, Julie's husband, Bobby Troop, wrote a couple of songs because they couldn't find any that had already been written for those particular months. The idea, Calendar Girl, is based on this sort of thing, pin-up calendars, the last roundup. For every month we have a beautiful young, scantily clad woman dressing up, illustrating the theme of whatever happens to be going on that month. These are the sort of thing that were hung in machine shops and garages, electro, whatever. The concept album in the 1960s kind of brings us around full circle. This is the Beatles' White Album. You have the name blind embossed there, and this stamp of whichever particular number this is. And there you have the inside cover. Taking it a step further, this Santana album, again, it has the blind embossing, but without the stamping, so it's like totally white. It says, can you see that? It says, welcome. This would be from 1973. And finally, kind of ironic, isn't it, when the word album comes from the Latin for white, that we have the Black Album by Metallica, 1991.